It all started with a security test. Let's ask ourselves, why is it needed? At the time of the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, reactor number 4 was no longer new and had been in operation since December 20, 1983. 11 days after the reactor was turned on, the director of the power plant, Viktor Brukhanov, signed a document on the completion of the construction of the reactor before the end of the year. Ryuchanov received the title of Hero of Socialist Labor, Nikolai Fomin the Medal for Workers' Excellence, and Anatoly Dyatlov was honored with the Order of the Red Banner of Labor. All the work, however, has not yet been completed, so the document signed by the director of the power plant was false. The certificate could only be issued after all safety tests had been successfully completed. One has not yet been made. In a nuclear reactor, the core produces heat and the solid heat cools it. Under the influence of heat, the water transforms into steam and turns the turbine. Thus, an electric current is formed. When the power plant has no power, the pumps do not cool the core. Without water, the core overheats and the fuel melts. This is how a nuclear catastrophe occurs. Is there a solution? The reactor has 3 emergency generators with diesel engines. Ryuchanov knew that the problem was not solved. Generators take about a minute to generate the power needed to power the pumps, and it was too late. So we come to the security test. The theory was this: in the event of a decrease in power, the turbine would rotate for some time the momentum force. What if we were to use the electricity that is still generated and direct it to the pumps? If the turbine powered the pumps for those 60 seconds until the generators started working, during the test, the generator power is reduced to 700 megawatts to reproduce the conditions for power loss. Turbines are turned off, and when they slow down, it measures how much electricity they generate to determine if there is enough electricity to power the pumps. The first test attempt failed, as did the second and third attempts. The fourth rehearsal took place on the night of April 25th to 26th, 1986. To understand what happened that night, we have to go back 10 hours to the day before the test was supposed to take place. Until 2:00 p.m., the power of the reactor was halved from 3,600 megawatts to 1,600. The reactor was stable, so preparations were made to reduce the power required by the test to 700 megawatts. The work was interrupted by a phone call from power dispatchers from Kiev, who demanded that the test be stopped and delayed for 10 hours. Here came the first mistake of seeking disaster. The competent management ordered to stop the test and resume it after 10 hours, but Ryuchanov, Fomin, and Dyatlov allowed it to continue. Why was the delay dangerous? It posed 2 problems: scientific and human nature. Let's deal with problem number 2. At midnight, the night shift begins. These employees are not trained. Nobody had warned them before what would happen and what the test would look like. Leonid Topyanov, the operator responsible for the control and stabilization of the reactor, had only 4 months of experience in the work. This is a human problem caused by delay. However, something much more dangerous was created inside the core: poison. 2 processes take place in a nuclear reactor: reactivity that generates power. It rises or falls. Operators only maintain balance. As uranium atoms split and collide, the reactivity increases. If it is not balanced, it will never stop and will continue to go up. On the other hand, boron control rods stop the reactivity so that it does not grow, just like the brakes in a car. The third factor, water, must also be taken into account. Cold water receives heat from the system and turns into steam, the so-called steam space. In the RBMK-1000 reactors, which were used at the Chernobyl power plant, there is a positive coefficient of reactivity of steam spaces. What does this mean? The more steam there is in the system, the greater the reactivity. By heating up, nuclear fuel becomes less reactive. Thus, the fuel increases it, and the control rods and water reduce it. Water vapor is again larger, but the increase in temperature decreases. This is the invisible wheel that powers entire cities without fire, but only if everything is as it should be. When uranium splits releasing energy, another element is released. Xenon, like an increase in temperature, reduces radioactivity. When the core is working with all its might, the xenon has slept before it causes a problem. Due to the delay, reactor number 4 in Chernobyl operated at half power for 10 hours, so the xenon did not burn. It gathered poisoning the core. This upset the balance. At 12:28 a.m. the reactor should slow down, but in less than an hour there will be a catastrophe. At 12:38 a.m., the reactor is almost shut down. Operators are on the final straight to disaster. There is no turning back. At 30 megawatts, the xenon continues to secrete, but is not burned. The reactor is already all poisoned. To make matters worse, this poison is very hot. In order for it to be possible to raise the power in this situation, it would be necessary to do it very slowly, over the course of a whole day. Dyatlov, however, tells you to do it immediately. Akimov and Topyanov begin to pull out the rods a dozen each. However, the power does not change. In Chernobyl reactor number 4, there were 211 control rods. 205 have already been completely pulled out. Of the 211 rods in the reactor, only 6 remain. The fuel is cold, so the negative temperature coefficient no longer reduces reactivity. Xenon poisoning is already so strong that the best option would be to raise the power to 200 megawatts. The reactor is held only by water and xenon. It's 1 o'clock a.m. The test is about to begin. Problems begin that were already unsolvable. Too little power, too much water. The test failed, but Dyatlov did not care about it, because he wanted to notify the management about the completion of it. 1:02 a.m., 1 minute before the explosion, Yevchenko, a mechanical engineer, is in his office. Engineer Paravichenko is located in the hall above the steel cover of the reactor weighing 1,000 tons. Degturenko and Kodemchuk, the pump operators, are in the pumping station. None of them were told about the test. 1:02 a.m. in 30 seconds, Topyanov reads a computer printout. Due to the insufficient number of control rods, it is recommended by the computer to completely turn off the reactor. Dyatlov ignores it, says that the computer recommends it because it does not know about the test. 1:03 a.m. and 4 seconds, with every decision, the workers stretch the reactor like a slingshot. More than ever, the test begins. The pumps are turned off, so they stop pushing water through the reactor. Uranium fuel is not regulated by coolant or control rods. In less than a second, reactivity begins to increase. The water that remains in the core quickly turns into steam. There is no fresh water. Steam increases reactivity. More heat and steam is released. Reactivity continues to grow. The remaining xenon disintegrates. The power is increasing, and we can't stop it. 1:03 a.m. and 40 seconds. In every control room in the world, there is an 8 button with the function of immediate interruption of the reaction. In Soviet reactors, this button is called as 5. When it is pressed, all the control rods are inserted simultaneously. The reaction is stopped. Dyatlov broke all the rules and did it believing in security. In the conditions he created, there was no chance of the button working. The emergency shutdown system had a drawback. At 1:03 and 40 seconds, Akimov presses his 5. The pulled rods begin to return to the reactor. They are made of boron, which reduces reactivity, but their tips are made of graphite, which increases it. Because Soviet reactors of the RBMK-1000 type do not have a safety housing, the cores do not use the appropriate enriched fuel. The USSR was the only country to create water-cooled, graphite-moderated reactors with a positive coefficient of reactivity of steam spaces. Why? Because it was cheaper. Graphite tips first go to the core, and then the reactivity, which has already grown, jumps sharply upwards. All liquid water instantly turns into water vapor, which, expanding, destroys fuel channels. The control rods cannot therefore slide deeper. The graphite tips are immobilized, and they accelerate the reaction indefinitely. Chernobyl's number for reactor is now a nuclear bomb. 1:03 a.m. and 42 seconds. Engineer Paravichenko looks at the huge steel cover of the reactor and sees what has been impossible so far. Fuel channel covers, weighing 350 kilograms each, jump up. 1:03 a.m. and 44 seconds, steam blows up more fuel channels. We don't know how the power changed. We only know the reading. Reactor number 4, which was supposed to operate at 3,200 megawatts, exceeded 33,000 megawatts. The pressure in the core can no longer be controlled. 1:03 a.m. and 45 seconds. At the time of blowing up, oxygen enters the reactor. It combines with hydrogen and superheated graphite. The catastrophe reaches its apogee. That night, no one would have thought that the off button could act as a fuse. They didn't know it because it was hidden from them. This is how the core of the RBMK-1000 reactor explodes, which, according to nuclear physicists of the Soviet Union, was impossible until the disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant named after Vladimir Lenin. In the next episode, we will find out what the first days after the Chernobyl disaster looked like, and how the authorities began to react to it.